I'm just gonna say it right away. We all associate MGM with that iconic lion roaring in the logo before the movie starts. A bit of an aggressive way to start a movie, but it's probably going to be the thing that's most remembered about them. The reason you see it play before so many movies is because, in many cases, they are the company responsible for making that movie. Specifically, in the golden age of Hollywood, they're responsible for all of these classics, including The Wizard of Oz. I mean, right there, that may be the most well-known movie that was ever made. During that time, they were putting out these timeless classic movies just one after another. They were arguably the biggest, most impactful movie studio. Yet, by the end of that era in the 1960s, they had fallen from those heights and for the past 50 plus years haven't been able to return to them. In fact, in 2010, they even filed for bankruptcy. They still exist, but that's a pretty big fall. So today, I want to take a look at what happened to MGM. And there is a lot going on here, so I'm going to do my best to stick to the aspects that are more applicable to their various rises and falls throughout the years. The name MGM stands for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. It was formed in 1924 when 3 different production companies merged together. Metro Pictures was an existing production company bought by Marcus Lowe 5 years earlier. You may know that name from his chain of movie theaters that have since been bought and renamed by AMC. He had owned the movie theaters and bought Metro Pictures so they can produce movies that could be played in those theaters. On a sadder note, he did die of a heart attack only 3 years after this big merger. The name Goldwyn comes from Goldwyn Pictures, and they are actually the ones that originated that lion logo. That company was formed 8 years earlier by Samuel Goldfish and 2 brothers with the last name of Selwyn. Goldwyn was a combination of their names, but then oddly enough, Samuel Goldfish legally changed his name to Samuel Goldwyn after the success of the business. Also, oddly enough, he had left the company 2 years before the merger and had nothing to do with the actual MGM. The final name, Mayer, comes from Louis Mayer, who was also involved in various parts of the film industry. Applicable here, he was the owner of his own production company that he had started 6 years earlier. So there we have it. In 1924, Metro, Goldwyn, and Mayer all came together to form this production company that quickly became much bigger and more powerful than the sum of its parts. I would attribute a lot of their early success to taking advantage of their combined size and spending a lot of money to make movies. See, this was in the time back when actors and directors were treated more like sports players. They would sign contracts with the studios and work exclusively for them on multiple movies through the length of that contract. MGM had made deals with some of the biggest actors in the industry and had made hundreds of movies featuring them. A famous example of how this worked to their advantage was with the movie Gone with the Wind. It was going to be made without MGM's involvement, but the producer wanted Clark Gable to be in it. Since he had a contract with MGM, they used it as a way to become involved. They made this deal where Clark Gable would act in it and MGM would distribute it and in return receive about half the profits. And that was big because to this day, when you adjust for inflation, Gone with the Wind is considered to be the highest grossing movie of all time. Not to mention all of the Oscars it won, including Best Picture. By the way, I have to point this out, that movie came out the same year as The Wizard of Oz, which wasn't as successful at the time, but I would still consider that an outstanding year for MGM. On top of that, remember, they also owned Lowe's Theaters. Owning both ends of that studio theater transaction saved a ton of money. That was some effective vertical integration happening, leading to higher profits and assuring that they would have a means to show their movies to the public. Considering they had built a strong roster of famous actors that were featured in some of the highest grossing, critically acclaimed movies of their time and happened to own a major chain of movie theaters where people can watch them, I would say that would explain the amazing success of MGM. But then, things started to take a turn. Maybe the biggest part of it was this 1948 Supreme Court decision. It was intended to break up these vertical monopolies forming between the studios and the theaters, and effectively meant that MGM was legally forced to sell Lowe's Theaters, which meant that they now had to be more discerning with the movies that they made, because for the first time, they were relying fully on theaters outside of the company to show them. And as if that wasn't bad enough, on top of it, this happened right when the television was becoming popular. More people were were choosing to stay home and watch it as opposed to going out and spending money on the movies. Their sales were going down while their expenses were going up, both of which, of course, were hurting their profits. To save money and reduce their risk, they started cutting corners, making cheaper productions, releasing their actors from their contracts, and just becoming smaller and less significant overall. And it wasn't just MGM, these were things affecting the entire industry, but considering MGM was among the biggest, they were among the most affected. After 32 years of uninterrupted profits, 1957 was the first year that they actually lost money. So that's my summary of how MGM rose to the top and started a significant decline, but I'm not done yet. There are still some crazy things that happen from here, all of them involving Kirk Kerkorian. He became the owner, and it seems to me anyway, that he never cared much about MGM. Here's why I say that. Before becoming involved with MGM, he was a pilot in World War II, made millions of dollars after the war in the aviation industry, before becoming a big name in the Las Vegas real estate market. Well, in 1969, he took control of MGM and started veering the company away from movie production and toward real estate development. Soon after he took over, he sold a bunch of old movie props, including those famous ruby slippers from the movie. He slowed down the movie production and put the money toward building the largest hotel in the world, the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. In fact, I suspect that the main reason he got involved with MGM was because he saw it as a means to get this hotel built, and then he can use the MGM name on it to attract visitors. By 1980, this once dominant movie studio had unexpectedly become more of a hotel/real estate business than anything else. So that year, he separated the film and the hotel operations into two separate companies. The hotels went on to do their own thing, they're still separated today, but I'm gonna stick with the film company here, because the very next year, MGM Film bought a respected movie studio called United Artists. If you don't know about United Artists, just trust me when I say that they definitely deserve their own video. What's applicable here is they had recently produced some Best Picture winning movies before a financial stumble with a movie called Heaven's Gate, which I think people like to exaggerate, but it still wasn't good. I think MGM used that opportunity to buy United Artists and expand their film production, plus the archives. With HBO and other similar channels now looking to pay to license old movies to be shown on their channels, that archive of old movies was looking attractive. The combined archive of the two studios was actually a big motivation behind this amazingly confusing deal MGM made with Ted Turner in 1986. Ted Turner owned the television network TBS, so early in the year, he bought the whole company, MGM and United Artists. It cost him $1.5 billion, but he wanted to do it because it would give him the right to show all of those old movies and TV shows on his channel. Well, almost instantly, he sold United Artists right back to Kerkorian, then a few months later, sold most of MGM back as well. He just held on to those archives. So those were strange deals that effectively resulted in the loss of the MGM archives. To this day, MGM does not own the rights to those old MGM movies. I believe that some other sales have now brought the rights over to Warner. Then 4 years later, Kerkorian sold the company for a second time, and again, it became a complex disaster. Listen to this one. The buyer was a holding company that almost immediately filed for bankruptcy following the purchase. Their creditor was this French bank that then sued Kerkorian, claiming he gutted everything from MGM before the sale. I guess kind of like selling a used car, but then taking out all the valuable parts before handing it over. The lawsuit ended in an undisclosed settlement, so I don't know exactly what happened there, but it sounds to me like he may have harmed the company by stripping some assets away from it. And that is still not the end for Kerkorian, because in 1996, he bought MGM for a third time. Things actually went pretty well this time. The company invested in some TV channels, put out some big movies, even paid off most of their debt, but here's where things go bad again. In 2004, they took out a loan of almost $2 billion and used the money to issue this special one-time dividend to its shareholders. Since Kerkorian owns something like 70% of those shares, he effectively added a bunch of debt to the company and took most of the money for himself, which I suppose didn't matter much anyway, because a year later, Sony got together with a bunch of private equity firms and bought MGM in this leveraged buyout. They assumed that $2 billion billion in existing debt and added a bunch more of it through the transaction. So much of it that 5 years later, they were unable to pay it and they were forced into bankruptcy. So to summarize some of the actions that likely harmed MGM Studios after the golden age following the 1960s, selling assets and taking attention away from the movie production to build hotels and then separating those hotels from the company, losing their library of classic films in a strange sale and repurchase of the company, potentially stripping assets from it before selling it a second time, loading them with debt before selling them a third time, and adding additional debt in the process of that sale. I'd say those things have been harmful. I guess to wrap up the story to this point anyway, in 2021 it was announced that the studio was bought by Amazon for over $8 billion. They likely wanted it mostly for the streaming rights to the thousands of movies and TV shows that still remain in their catalog, so that's where they stand today. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of MGM? Considering that their best days were, I don't know, 70, 80 years ago, I'm gonna go ahead and guess that most of the people watching this weren't alive to see it. But I do think that we all at least know them. They've never completely gone away. You can stay at their hotel in Las Vegas, and I couldn't tell you how many times I've seen that lion before watching a movie. I think there's something cool about that. The stuff that they made in 1939 is still a part of our culture today. Also, what do you think of my explanations behind these